right. My name is Adam Hudson, and this is Organizational Leadership 400 Professional Development. And let's share my screen. Hopefully, you all could see it. Which you probably won't because it's on the wrong screen. There we go. All right. So this is a presentation of who am I, a view we could look at of who am I or who are you. But for this presentation, what we'll go over is understanding cultural identity structure and then cultural identity explained. What the difference in the representation show, cultural identity shaping and learning. So first, this cultural identity structure, this is a structured view. Cultural identity structure is a model one has in participating in cultural groups that forms their self-concept. So from that, as implied with the structure, it's going to be something we could see, something we could view, a representation of the person that gives them the sense of their self, the concept of their self. I did a model myself. This model represents my identity structure. Important to keep in mind, the size of each part shows the relevance of the group on my structure or my representation. Oh, this is what mine looks like. You can see I'm a parent, I'm a graduate student, I'm an American, I'm male. And a little bit more into this, the representation is a portion of the group. My cultural identity group, that's a big part of my identity structure, is being a parent. So obviously you can see that's half of my structure. Another big one is being a graduate student. So that takes a lot of time of my representation and my model of what I understand my identity to be. And then a little bit, I got a couple more parts. Being an American, obviously, I have that. There's no way getting around that group. Where it's almost geographically male. I try to make this one the smallest portion of my identity structure, and just for the reason is my sense of self. Yes, this is a part of me, but it's not as big as being an American, being a graduate student, being a parent. It doesn't really come into my day to day, or it's there. That's why I put it as a small portion. Oh, so from this, what we get is a perspective, my perspective of my identity, cultural identity, and so what this is important to remember, the configuration does not represent all the members in the given culture or the given group. So like in um, my structure, parent being half of my structure isn't the same representation somebody else will have in their structure. Their structure, even though it has parent, also will not look like mine. It might be smaller, it might be less, it might represent differently. Um, Limits of this kind of perspective is it separates me from the group. So even though I identified Mike as a graduate student, that structure separates me from everybody else in the group. So that's keep that in mind and understand that as a perspective. What is shown from the structure is what is present and what is not. So comparative to my perspective to another perspective, mine is showing what I identify as me and the groups that I associate myself with. So you could also understand that as there's not a religious part in there. So in my cultural structure identity, that is not part of my structure. There could be other parts. A video game player that's not part of my structure. So that's important to keep in mind. What is there, it doesn't show what's not there. And then moving on away from the structure into cultural identity can be understood as one's representation in a given group. So we can look at the graphical representation of this cultural identity next slide, but it's taken into account the group also. And what it does or what it's trying to show is give an explanation to our behaviors, reactions, and values through the association of being represented in the group. And then this is the graphical representation. You could obviously see there's a lot of overlap. Me is the one getting covered up. So what we could take from this is, again, we have the same groups that I identified before, but they're just represented in this identity. And so I'm behind there, but you could see again the parent group on top of me. What it's explaining is like that group, I'm a part of that group, but only in that amount or that part of it. Like if you look all the way on the outside of the to the right of the parent group, my bubble isn't touching that part. So what you could infer or understand is that there's parents that are not like me, but I'm still associated with that cultural group. The same with being white. You could see again, like how I explained it. It's just barely touching me, but it's still part of me, American grad student. And what this does is gives us. So obviously, in the grad student, there's certain behaviors and actions that I'm going to do as a grad student that make me me. So like us reading, studying, writing, all that stuff that comes along with being a grad student, but it also defines me as what I identify as my cultural identity. And the same with the other groups, white, American. So compare the representations, the two different ones. The structure representation is subjective representation. It's really focused on individual representation of their perception of the cultural identity they come up with. Um, the representation two, the identity, it's taken into account not only the individual but also the group, and it gives more understanding and explanation on to what makes up how those interact and what that looks like. So learning diversity, it's coming from these representations, what you really get is an understanding of who you are, or like who am I. That's why the title of this is who am I, but that's relative to whoever's watching this. Who am I? It's letting you know visually what makes you you, what your sense of self. And then how we can use this in organizational diversity is how these representations and understandings translate into in the everyday of knowing what becomes known. And an example of this is like one would know who they are, and they identify in all the groups or whatever as they interact in the organization. They're coming to work. As they interact, they're coming to understand not only who they are but others as well. And what that means is the when they're working, the training that happens and the knowing that happens is when they're observing others, they're able to put that other person that they're watching or they're working with, whatever stands out to them, they're able to link that to another group or culture. So it's not just that person does those things for whatever odd reason. It's part of that person is part of a group, part of another culture. That's the training that comes with it in organizational diversity. We're going to be working with a bunch of different people that have different actions. They might talk this way, that way, whatever, but the knowing happens like that. The changing is what happens in a person, anybody, and this happens to each individual in the group through their interplay, which is them going to work in the organization. They begin to understand how their own actions and behaviors have changed to put them in the group. So now their who they are becomes a group, a culture of its own, and that happens two ways. They understand what they do outside of the group and what they do inside of the group. There's a difference, and when they're communicating, they find common behaviors and representations, and that is the change that happens. Knowing the difference, like what makes them um, diverse, but also coming together to work in a group and organization. So, and these are my references. I want to take a look at those, and that would be it.